So welcome to the Grand Rapids Label video blog series, installment 2 of our series focused on innovation discussions. The goal of these blogs is to, provide content that can help push the industrial durable label space forward. I'm Bill Bergstrom with Grand Rapids Label, decades old converter that lives in the industrial durable label space. I'm really excited today to have Ted Hanson, CEO of Convergen Energy, with us today. Convergen's in the renewable energy space. They help us, Grand Rapids Label, with our waste to energy efforts. It's an incredibly important conversation, one we're really passionate about at Grand Rapids Label. If you follow us all at all on social media, you'll see our posts about our environmental efforts and our beliefs in sustainability. So really excited to have Ted here with us today. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you.
So our discussions, again, are on innovation, industrial durable label space. So, we look at a couple of horizons. Today, we have some great infographics to really frame up our conversation that we'll get to. We're going to start with a little conversation about state of the market and then look at our horizons. But before we get too far, Ted, a little, some words about yourself, some words about Convergen, help kind of put into context why we're together, and then we'll get going.
Sure. Well, thanks, Bill. We appreciate the relationship we've had with Grand Rapids Label over the years, and you guys are truly focused on sustainability, and we appreciate the work that we've been able to do with you, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So thank you.
You bet.
Little background on myself. I've got a chemical engineering background, and I've been involved in making paper and nonwovens and other consumer type products, wonderful products like toilet paper and facial tissue. But I got involved with Convergen Energy at its startup in 2009 as a startup company. And basically we were trying to wrestle with how can we provide a renewable alternative to fossil fuels that are cost competitive with fossil fuels and do not require government subsidies. And so we started exploring that market space and looking for opportunities. And what we found is that there are industrial manufacturers all over the country producing consumer products day in and day out. And they have scrap, they have trim, obsolete materials, discards. And these materials are oftentimes non-recyclable. And they go to the landfill by the truckload and nobody sees them. But they're very clean. The producers of these materials know exactly what's in them. And we found that we could take these, collect them, blend them, and turn them into a solid fuel that is burned as a fossil fuel substitute. And also in doing that, we found that the attributes of this fuel are basically have the same carbon footprint as woody biomass. And so when you burn these materials, they burn as clean as woody biomass, but they're displacing fossil fuels. And so we've been providing landfill alternatives to companies and fossil fuel alternatives to companies now for about 12 years. Yeah. And in doing that, we've diverted over 500,000 tons from landfills, around the country. So it's a great story, and it's something that we're looking to continue expanding as we go forward.
Yeah. The numbers, for you guys, the scale is really neat. I mean, we look at our own numbers. We're north of 80% landfill free, in huge part with our partnership with you. So we're proud of our numbers, and then they scale right on out when you talk about your numbers. So really important stuff. So for today's discussion, again, what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the state of the market, again, focusing kind of largely on waste to energy. And then again, we'll talk about some horizons, what's coming down the pike. And again, we have some really neat infographics to use to help tell those stories about innovation and waste to energy and what's coming down the pike. So again, this is a transition to you, Ted. Help us frame up, again, part of today's conversation with a little bit of the state of the waste to energy market, conversations as they stand today.
Yeah, so When we started this business, 11, 12 years ago, companies were talking about sustainability. They were talking about going green. We've been hearing those terms for quite a while. But what we've seen in the last year or two is just an exponential increase in the pressures being put on companies by the consumer, where the consumer is really demanding companies become truly environmentally sustainable. And we find that it's not government that's driving environmental change, it's consumers demanding it. And in turn, the suppliers of consumer products are responding to that and requiring their suppliers to be sustainable and to show what they're doing to make their products more environmentally friendly. And the pace of change is just incredible. This is just happening overnight. So what we've been doing is, working with customers to start understanding, well, what are their needs? What are customers, what are consumers demanding? And they're demanding a number of things. Number one, they want their suppliers to be landfill free. Number two, they want the suppliers of their products to be using renewable power. They want them reducing their carbon footprint, having zero carbon emissions, doing whatever they can to eliminate greenhouse gases and keeping things like plastic and non-recyclable materials out of the environment. So, that's where we're seeing things right now. And the big term now that we're hearing everybody talk about is circularity. And so whereas in the past, companies talked about going green or being sustainable, now folks are looking at it and seeing sustainability managers are saying, we got to really understand what is the life cycle analysis of our product, right? What happens from cradle to grave, and how do we extend that period before it goes to the grave? Right. And if it does go to the grave, what's the best way to send it to the grave? And there's a lot of work around this and a lot of pressure. Things like the Paris Climate Accord, the greenhouse gas emission reportings that's being required by EPA, carbon taxes that are starting to come up. There's all kinds of things driving this need to understand the environmental impact of our products.
I'm always struck when I talk environmentalism, right? Broad, super broad term. And I say that for a reason, right? Because the topic gets broad fast, right? And circularity broadens it out, right? So help us, and again, I know we have some graphics to help, but when you talk about what's coming is, and you're looking, maybe let's say 1 or 2 years down the pike, is that an opportunity to help people like me, or maybe a viewer of the content here, simplify some of this conversation, going forward?
I don't know about simplifying it. I think it's all complicated.
Okay.
But I think you're right. On one extreme, we see this broadening of all of these concepts, and it gets very, very complicated. But yet on the other hand, on any individual component, we see companies and governments and consumers taking a very narrow view. So an example, you'll see things classified in very broad terms, like solar is carbon-free emissions, solar is good. Whereas waste to energy is combustion. So it still has some emissions, so that must be bad. Right. And what we're not doing is looking at the big picture and recognizing that, okay, solar is good when the sun is shining, but when the sun is not shining, there's a fossil fuel asset running in the background ready to provide electricity when that solar is not working. And so we're not looking at the big picture. And so the question is, how do you get good information that causes you not to be so narrow focused that you're not looking at the bigger picture, but yet not looking at such a big picture that it just becomes confusing and it causes paralysis?
Okay, yeah. So but that's helpful context to that conversation, and maybe it's time to bring up kind of that analysis graphic that we have. Maybe that helps color this conversation a little bit.
Absolutely, and so the emphasis that we're seeing now is companies doing what's called life cycle analysis, where you really start to look at the total picture of what you're doing around your sustainability efforts. And so this would be an example of a life cycle analysis we've been doing on a waste to energy solution that we're offering. And it's drawing a box around a company that is generating waste products and also using power to produce those products. So every plant uses a certain amount of electricity.
Sure.
And so the red bars represent what happens if you're sending, in your case, label waste, matrix waste to a landfill, and at the same time consuming electricity to produce those products. And so a life cycle analysis will measure the environmental impact of the red bars, and then contrast that to if you take those same waste materials and instead of going to a landfill, you transport them, in your case, all the way to Green Bay. So you're going from Grand Rapids, Michigan, all the way over to Green Bay around the pond,
right,
as we call it. And we're converting these materials into a fuel pellet. And so we're putting energy into it and handling, and then we're transporting these products to our customers who are now making electricity, which is classified as renewable electricity. And so we get questions all the time. How does it make sense to transport my waste materials from Grand Rapids, Michigan, all the way to Green Bay? You put energy into these to make these fuel products, and then you're converting them into electricity. How do I know that's better than just making electricity out of coal? And so, you know, as we do life cycle analysis, it starts to answer questions like that.
Sure, sure. Is there a component of this life cycle analysis that is, again, maybe the trickiest, or one that should be highlighted as a particularly important conversation here on this graphic?
So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but I think what's tricky about this is where you draw the box.
Okay.
And so if a Grand Rapids label, as an example, just draws the box around the waste materials going to a landfill or going to us to be turned into a pellet, you only get a small piece of the story. But when you draw the box all the way around to the production of electricity, you start to really see the impact of sending your waste materials from the landfill to us to turn them into power. And so the question is, how then does a Grand Rapids label capture the benefits that they are causing? You guys are causing a lot of environmental benefits by doing what you're doing, but how do you capture those benefits and communicate those and leverage them to grow and support your business and your customers? So I think that's where the next graphic kind of starts to answer those questions, and you really start to see a fuller picture. Because if you look at the pie chart on the right, it starts to break down the impact of producing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity out of your materials versus producing them from a fossil fuel like coal or pet coke, something like that, versus natural gas. And so when you look at the emissions that come from producing electricity with our fuel, the dark blue are the emissions that come from the combustion side of it. The red part is the environmental impacts of transporting your materials to Green Bay, and the yellow is the energy and the emissions that we put out to make the product. And you can see the majority of it is in the production of the electricity. That's where the majority of the emissions come from.
Right.
Very little is coming from the transportation and the production of the fuel.
Right.
But what's interesting is that pie chart represents the dark blue bar on the far right there. So if you compare the CO2 emissions that are coming from producing 1 kilowatt hour from our product, it's only 0.3 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Whereas if you compare that to the Wisconsin state grid on average, if you're buying power off the Wisconsin state grid, the fuel mixture that they're using is producing 0.82 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour. And this particular power plant that we're sending to our product to, using their fossil fuels, was emitting 1.43 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So Grand Rapids Labels and other companies sending their materials to us are providing a 79% reduction in CO2 emissions at this particular power plant versus sending it to a landfill where it just sits there forever.
Yeah. The numbers are so helpful and they're always impressive, right? I mean, the numbers like this are incredibly impressive. We'll leave it up here for another little bit for viewers. So then that kind of leads to the next question here in an innovation discussion. You know, to achieve these numbers, to embrace the value of a life cycle analysis, like you've talked about, and quite frankly, some of the hard work involved with those processes. You know, how do you start those conversations, right? As an organization, what kinds of questions can organizations be asking today that help them, you know, start their journey and start realizing, you know, the value of this conversation and this journey? Help us kind of frame that up. So if I'm listening to this and inspired by it, what kinds of conversations could I be driving internally to get here?
I think what we're seeing, you know, one of the challenges that companies have is how do you create alignment for the various groups that have various objectives when it comes to sustainability. And so in particular, we tend to see that there may be one group in a company that's focused on waste. They're kind of the raw material supply chain, and they're dealing with the waste side of things. And then there'll be another group that's working on energy, and they're working on acquiring the lowest cost energy. And a lot of times they're focused on how do we find renewable energy. And then there's a sustainability group, a sustainability manager who's asking all of these groups for information and data so that they can understand their environmental footprint and report these numbers. And I think sometimes it's how do you get these three groups talking to each other and in alignment so that the energy buyer who is looking at signing a solar or a wind agreement that might have a term of 10, 15, 20 years. Okay. Yeah. So they're making decisions around their energy that will have impacts for 10, 15, 20 years, when that decision could enable a waste solution, which could also provide a benefit to the sustainability manager who's looking to understand how do we reduce our total carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. And so what we would encourage companies to do is figure out, you know, what we're trying to offer is a circular solution whereby the energy buyers can provide a solution that's guaranteed for their waste solution that's also meeting the sustainability needs. Right. And so, you know, as an example, many people are familiar with, you know, recycling problems that we've had in the country where a lot of our recyclables went to China for years. And one day China said enough and put up the green sword and stopped accepting a lot of our recyclable materials. And now they're going to a landfill. And so in this circular solution, the energy buyer, by buying renewable energy produced from this waste, can set up a contract that guarantees the outlet for this waste. So that a Grand Rapids label never has to worry about getting a phone call that's saying, hey, my supplier in XYZ location just cut me off. You got to find a new home for your waste. Yeah. Meanwhile, you're getting renewable power and guaranteeing the outlet over here and providing the sustainability manager with the carbon benefits that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. thus the circular approach, right? You're
Yep.
moving your arms almost in
Yep.
exactly that, a circular motion.
How would I
It's-
explain this without my hands? So,
Right,
you know,
yeah,
that's-
right, yeah. Join the club. I'm the can guy too. I think that visualization, again, for me, is one of the, when we were working together to put this together, that visualization of that circular approach, right? And here I go using my hand,
Yep.
is really, really helpful, right? Maybe a takeaway again for the listener here today, about that, right? Think all the way around what you're doing, from buying to producing to trying to reduce the carbon footprint. It's such a helpful synthesis of the larger conversation. Gosh, I can't thank you enough for spending a few minutes in this type of format. There's no question that there's valuable data that supports this, and in the work. We love our relationship with you guys. The work you guys do is work that we're proud to partner with you on, and is really exciting for us going forward. To the viewer, hopefully that's been helpful. We have some contact information on leading up to this. Convergen is convergenenergy.com, easily found on the web, and hopefully this has been really, really helpful. Thank you very much.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yep.